In a brilliantly funny move, Texas State Rep. James Tallarico turned the tables on conservative Christian arguments by using biblical scripture to oppose a bill requiring the display of 10 commandments in public school classrooms. Tallarico, a Democrat, calmly explained why the bill was not only unconstitutional and un American, but also deeply unchristian. Viral TikTok video, he questioned the contradiction of wanting parental consent for values like empathy, but pushing for religious commandments in schools. Tallarico's witty remarks left supporters of the bill searching for words, and although it's unclear if his arguments influenced the outcome, the bill's time expired without receiving a vote. With lawmakers like Tallarico, the fight against conservative religious impositions in school gets hilarious and a strategic edge. This article is from Yahoo News by Ariel Messman Rucker from November 24th, 2023. So, yeah, this is a continuing trend. We're starting to see Christians pop up and speak against their own. Aaron, what do you have to say about this report?
This is an amazing video. If anybody hasn't watched it, you should. I hate to. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but pause this video and go watch it because this is amazing. More people like this, please. I'd vote for this guy whether he was Democrat or Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, whatever. But he had some really. He just pointed out the hypocrisy between what Christians purportedly believe, but what they're doing politically. And he said things like, a religion that has to force people to put up a poster to prove its legitimacy is a dead religion. Instead of bringing a bill that will feed the hungry, we're instead mandating that people put up a poster. Loving your neighbor is the most important law, but now they're putting up something. They want to mandate that something gets put up that doesn't show love for Hindus or Buddhists or atheists. They're all for parents' parental roles being the most important thing in the classroom, and parents having the best say. But there's no requirement for this bill to require parental consent to have commandments in the classroom. That they're against having rainbows for supporting LGBTQIA rights in the classroom, but they're not against having 10 commandments in the classroom. And lastly, he says, instead of living out the way of Jesus, we're instead imposing our beliefs on other people. Instead of leading by example, we're leading by mandates. And I just think those are just amazing, amazing things to confront people with. Richard?
Well, I think it gets back to that whole the hypocrisy thing. I'll sort of generalize it. I mean, you just think about the kind of things that the people that were trying to push that through, what they would have said a few years ago about government entanglement in our lives. They were totally against that. And I think, I don't live in Texas. I probably never would. I don't know if any of you do. I know it's some good places in Texas, but what I see there and follow is that, the Texas legislature and school board never seem to stop trying to proselytize students into Christianity. The school books are very, very bad in terms of the latest is that most of them that had something about climate change in it got cut out. And the schools were trying to put pastors in to replace school counselors, pastors with no requirement for any counseling training. So there's just this control mechanism is what it is. They want to narrow down and spoon feed people a certain ideology, it seems, through the legislative process, through the school process. And it's scary because, young minds growing up need to, what's the old statement? You don't want to teach people what to think, but how to think. And I don't think that's happening much there in terms of the way they're trying to do these things, like putting up the 10 commandments and not allowing, a rainbow flag, which is a very passive kind of thing, except if you hate what it stands for, which many of them do.
I watched the video and I was like, wow, where have all the Christians like this guy been, right? I want more Christians like this. And I have said many times, I even just said it again this week, there are a lot of Christians out there that believe this radical Christian nationalist ideas are hurting the religion, they're hurting the country. And we have a perfect example of a Christian standing up to that in, of all places, the Texas State House. I was just so awesome. So brought up by that. You can see I'm tongue-tied, right? All the atheist, Muslim, Hindu activists, all the activists of other faiths that oppose this wild right-wing ideology aren't the only ones out there standing up. And they shouldn't feel alone, because there are good Christians out there like Mr. Tarico that are fighting against it as well. He even says it near the end of the video when he, of the verbal confrontation in the committee hearing, when he says, I just worry that this is what gives us religious people a bad name, that instead of living out the way of Jesus, we're instead of imposing our beliefs on other people. Instead of leading by example, we're leading by mandates. And so I'm very offended by this legislation. And he should be offended, and he should be worried, because that's exactly what it is doing. And it's helping drive people out of the pews. I keep saying this. Honestly, I'm not opposed to that outcome of people not being in the pews, but I fear the danger and the damage that these people can do as they lash out like a wounded animal, because they feel like they're losing their America. Not ours, just theirs. Jimmy?
Yep. So this is, like I said, a trend that we are seeing grow. We have this representative, and then Kelly, you have spoken before about Christians fighting Christian nationalism. I read an article recently about an author who's challenging his own community, where politics and religion are intersecting, and it's nice to see that this is becoming more of a trend, or at least I'm starting to hear about it more. And I think more people may very well be getting comfortable standing up to what is actually wrong with their organization internally. But when we ask, where have these people been? They've been afraid of being ostracized, of losing everything, losing their relationships, because quite frankly, they're stuck in a dogmatic regime that will take everything away from you. And it's done that for centuries. We know that just because so many of these people believe it, doesn't necessarily make it true. But at the same token, we know that there's a danger in those numbers all throughout the Middle Ages. The sale of indulgences, the the Salem witch trials, the castration for the purposes of putting somebody in the choir. I mean, these dogmas can make people do horrible, horrible, ugly things. And they're not on the right side of what is considered humane. And I think the people that are stuck inside of it know it. So that's why we don't really see too much from them. So it's refreshing to see somebody, or many people, with the guts enough to stand up and be the voice of reason within their own communities. Aaron, you stole my quote, not my quote, but maybe Tallarico's quote. Religion has to force people to, yeah, right. The poster quote, that it's not legitimate if you need to push it on people, that it is a dead religion, was absolutely brilliant. And the other thing that's brilliant is that this guy is using their very own message to point out the flaws in the people that are using their very own message. If that is not an indication that there are so many more flaws in Christianity than most people think, because they're busy being stuck on one side, then I don't know what is. But it's definitely eye-opening for people who are interested, I think, to learn more about where they come from and what it is they've been told they have to believe. This guy is a testament to the fact that you don't have to believe it. And in fact, you could make it better. So Aaron, we'll kick it back over to you.
No, that's one of the fascinating things about the video is, if you watch it, it seems the representative that he is debating, she's hung up on the fact that in 1980 there was some decision. I don't know if it was a Supreme Court decision or if it was a law passed in Texas where the 10 Commandments it seems like they had to come out of the school, right? And what she was focused on, we have to correct this wrong. We have to correct this wrong of the 10 Commandments coming out of schools. But it seems like she didn't stop to think, is like, should they be in schools, right? And we can't be looking at we should look at the past to inform us. We should look at the past to prevent us ourselves from making the same mistakes over and over again. But other than that, we need to look at what our needs are today and what we want our country to be today. I want to live in a country where people's religion is just something you don't talk about anymore. It is private. You keep it to yourself, and we find other things to talk about and relate about. I think one of the more dangerous things in Christianity is the call to preach it, is the call to go out and share the gospel and preach it and convert people. If Christianity didn't have that, I think we'd be in a much better place. And he says in his speech that he's embarrassed to be a Christian. And to be honest, when I was a Christian, I was kind of embarrassed to be called a Christian too, because it seems like the loudest Christians are the ones that are the most hateful or the most bigoted, but unfortunately they have the biggest and the loudest voice. And so they just give everybody else a bad name, even though I am positive that there are more Christians out there that support LGBTQIA rights, that aren't bigoted, that want to help, that want to make the world a better place, than there are other Christians that are the opposite. Just I don't know why they don't speak. Probably fear, probably I don't know, but I wish they would. They wish they'd speak up more. I wish they'd come out and challenge these views that, hey, this is not the Christianity we want. This is not the country we want to live in. It takes one person to stand up, and then it takes one more person to join that person. You have to. The second person is almost the most important person to stand up, because lone voices are great, but you need that second person to stand up and share the spotlight. Richard?
And then the third and the fourth and the fifth.
Yeah.
And it keeps going. I saw that whole story a little while ago, but it wasn't just happening. And I thought it was so interesting how the proponent of that rule, just, excuse my French, but she got her butt kicked in the debate. I mean, she just, and then to say that, well, there was this old law, it should be turned around the other way. When was the last time she read the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? It says there's this nice bright line between, religion and government, but it's like they totally ignore that part and act like they're, being prejudiced against because they're not allowed to dominate. That's the thing that scares me. That's their whole thing, and there are parts of the New Testament that encourage them, in fact, demand that they go out and bring everybody to God, so, there are so many. I mean, you think about it, there are a lot of, there's 2,000 or 3,000 different brands of Christianity in the United States. Some of those have become very liberal, and they have gay preachers, and, they allow women to do a lot more in the church. So there are good people out there that have a certain amount of belief in some of the doctrines, but they also, I think they put humanity and compassion and empathy before the dogma. And to me, that's what makes a good person. If those are front and center in what you're doing. I mean, what's scaring me also about what's going on with these same groups of people is two words: book bans. They really don't want kids to learn anything. They don't, they're afraid if they get exposed to ideas, they won't do what their parents want them to do. They won't do what the preacher wants them to do. They might go, wait a minute, I read about, gee, isn't it true that 10% of people naturally are born homosexual? It's not like they're, this whole thing of they adopted that. I mean, how many people are going to say in our society, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Well, I didn't grow up there, but I've been living there for a long time, and very, very gay friendly. But it's like, how many people are going to say to themselves, "Oh, gee, I'm going to take on this sexual identity so I can be prejudiced against." I mean, I hear these Christians say that all the time about, oh, well, you decided to become gay. No, come on, give me a break. That's where their conflict with science always hits bottom, because they can't accept reality that their dogma back from the Old Testament was totally wrong, because they were ignorant. They didn't know anything about medicine. They didn't know anything about genetics. They didn't know anything about the different ways people can be naturally. And so they have to, make them an other because they're not the same as them. And that's the stuff. All of that just is very scary.
Yeah, to your point about book bans, I read Moby Dick and I didn't become a whaler. So
Are you sure?
yeah. And earlier this week, we talked about how your religious views affect your, how your politics affect your religious views. And I thought this story was like a really good example of that, because you have two people on different political ends of the spectrum, and they're both believing in the same religion, but they're both only picking and choosing the parts of it that fit their politics. And I thought that was kind of an interesting contrast, since we were talking about it earlier this week. The fact that these people are willing to stomp on the U.S. Constitution by breaking that, the First Amendment, and make this their America, I think that says a lot about who they are. And it reminds me of that famous quote from the Vietnam War, because these people seem to think that to save the they have to destroy the Constitution in order to save it, at least to save it for them. They don't care about anybody else, but they want to save it for them. And honestly, I think if all Christians felt like the same way as Mr. Tallarico, I don't think that we would have a lot of people that have a problem with religion as much as we do today. And they probably, I keep saying it, they wouldn't be losing people out of the pews. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other people wouldn't mind them hanging around either. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, we'll move away from these more militant Christians to a more forgiving, caring Christianity. You know, the ones that Jesus actually taught people to be, the kind of people that Mr. Tallarico are. And isn't it interesting that we always hear from Christians that when we use Old Testament arguments, they'll always say the Old Testament doesn't count. And here we have these two people with two political views, and one spouting the fire and brimstone of the Old Testament, and the other one's actually quoting Jesus. And what sides of the political spectrums are they on? It's kind of interesting, I thought. So, Jimmy?
Well, just one final thought. I don't
Sure.
think people like Tarico are ever going to be pushing for, Christian nationalism or a Christian theocratic government. I just don't see it in him. He seems to be, like you said, a more straightforward person who understands that there are other things in the world that need to be taken care of besides pushing your dogmatic ideology.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this whole article, this video, and the debate that takes place within serves as a microcosm for what it looks like and how damaging it can be for religion when somebody thinks for themselves. On one hand, we have a dogmatic and very traditional Senate and their leaders pushing for laws to or pushing for violations of the Constitution for really no good reason, right? And then we've got somebody else who thought creatively to challenge that. And so that is why I like to say, and I don't just like to say it, but of course I've heard this many, many times. The quickest way to become an atheist is to read the Bible. And I think the greatest threat to establishment religion is for somebody who is a free thinker. And so that is really evident in this case here, when you can take an argument for the 10 Commandments and compare it to an argument for homosexuality, and they cancel each other out. You're using the same kind of mechanics, the same tools, the same Bible to do the same thing. And it just goes to show you just how shitty of a source it is. Excuse my language, but it really has no leg to stand on, does it? Aaron?
Yeah, I'd like Christianity and Christians to get their story straight.
I was going to say it's not that it has no leg to stand on; it has too many legs to stand on.
It's been 2,000 years, and they don't even have the same. They don't have the same story. They've got different stories. Even their book contradicts itself. Everybody's preaching different things and different laws. Supposedly, what God says. If God is so powerful, why is there so many different messages? I don't. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you can make sense out of this, give us a comment below. And if you'd like to see more from the nonprofits, just click right here.